Hi everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 700 likes on this one. I think if everyone dropped a like, we could do it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as this channel is filled with content just like this. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. My husband, Howard, had been working away for a few days. On his way home, he lost control of his car during a downpour and crashed into another car. He got lucky. The other vehicle wasn't so fortunate, crashing into a transmission tower. The driver was a single mom, her 5-year-old son in the back. Neither survived. As the months went by, Howard was plagued with guilt. I suggested therapy, but he refused. I had to remind him daily that it wasn't his fault. He was a good man, a wonderful husband, and a great father to our 7-year-old son, Oscar. "They haunt me, Sasha," he'd say, his hands shaking. I can only imagine what that kind of experience will do to a person's mind. One of the hardest things was trying to explain to Oscar why Daddy was always sad and didn't want to play games anymore. One night, I was jolted awake by screaming. "She's here, Sasha," Howard cried. "It was just a bad dream," I said, trying to console him. "No," he screamed, pointing to the corner of the room. "She's here. She won't leave me alone." Our bedroom was empty, but I jumped as Oscar made a sudden appearance. "Daddy?" he said, scared. "Come here, buddy," said Howard, holding out his arms. I could feel Howard trembling as he hugged Oscar, his eyes fixed to the corner of the room. A few days later, Howard made a suggestion. "I've been thinking, it might be better for the two of you if I stay with my folks for a while, at least until I feel more myself." I felt bad, but it was a relief to hear. I was mentally exhausted and worried about how his behavior was affecting Oscar too. Howard's parents lived a 2-hour drive away. We made plans to visit on weekends. Oscar was my shadow for a couple of days, but regular video calls with Dad seemed to relax him. One afternoon, Oscar was playing in his room as I caught up with some shows that we'd put on hold. I heard him laugh cheerfully. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard him laugh. I crept upstairs, my heart filled with warmth. "Do you want to have a go?" I heard him say. At that point, I assumed he'd invited a friend over without my permission, which was against our house rules. I tapped on his bedroom door before pushing it open. "Oscar, who are you talking to?" He was sitting on the floor with his toy cars. There was no one with him. "Hey, where'd you go?" he said, looking around. "Mom, there was a boy here." "Was there?" I asked. Oscar had never exhibited signs of having an imaginary friend before. "Yes, he was crying in the closet, so I invited him to play." That gave me a shiver. "Why was he crying?" He shrugged. "I don't know, but he stopped when we started playing." The closet door was open, so I peeked inside. There was nothing unusual. We visited Howard that weekend. Oscar's grandparents took him out for ice cream, giving my husband and I some alone time. It was the first time we'd made love in months. "Oscar has an imaginary friend," I said as we cuddled. "Really?" he asked. "He said there's a boy in his closet." I chuckled. They played with his toys together. Howard shifted uncomfortably. "Are you serious?" "I don't think it's anything to worry about. I did a bit of research. It's completely normal for a lot of kids." He let out a long breath. "You're probably right, Sasha. The poor kid's been through a lot. What with having a crazy dad and all." Don't say that, I said. He misses you. You seem a lot better, honey. I have my moments, but I'm getting there. Mom has talked me into seeing a therapist. I squeezed his hand. I think that would be good for you. We want you back home as soon as possible. How would you feel about Oscar coming to stay with me next weekend? Give you a little break. You've pretty much been a single parent these past few weeks. He's such a good boy, I said. No trouble at all. But he'd love a weekend with Dad. Sure enough, Oscar was excited about spending the whole weekend with Howard. I heard him talking to his new friend about it as they played, but one evening, as I was making dinner, I was startled by several bangs coming from Oscar's bedroom. "Stop it!" I heard him cry. "Oscar?" I yelled, running upstairs. I burst into his bedroom to find him crying on the floor. "What happened?" I asked. "Lucas doesn't want me to go to Dad's." "Lucas? That's your friend's name?" I crouched down and put my arm around him. What was that banging I heard? He held up one of his toy cars. The front of it was mangled, like it had been smashed against something with force. How did this happen? "Lucas hit it on the floor," he said, pointing to a spot. There was a mark on the wooden floorboards. It was hard to believe that my 7-year-old son could cause such damage. It was harder to believe that his imaginary friend had done it. "Oscar, if you don't want to stay with Daddy, you don't have to." "I do," he said. "But Lucas said Daddy scares him." It felt like something walked over my grave. Be honest with me, sweetheart. Did Lucas say that, or is that how you feel? He started crying. "I want Dad to come home." "Me too," I said, hugging him as I looked around the room. I kissed the top of his head. "Go wash your hands. Dinner's almost ready." Oscar had never done anything like that before. He was having a harder time with the situation than I thought. That night, I searched Google for advice. It appeared that once again, such behaviors were normal in some children. He potentially had repressed anger as a result of Howard leaving us. The following Friday, I helped Oscar pack a weekend bag. "Do you want to take any toys?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I'll leave them for Lucas." "Oh, he's not going with you?" "He said he doesn't want to be near Dad." My heart sank. "Are you sure you want to go, sweetheart?" He nodded. "I can't wait." Howard came to pick Oscar up in the afternoon. It was so cute seeing our little boy run into his arms. "I'll drop him back Sunday," said Howard, giving me a kiss. "Love you, Sasha." "Love you," I smiled. "Have fun, boys." I waved them goodbye, trying not to worry too much. They both needed this. I was hopeful that it would be the catalyst for Howard coming home. In the meantime, I had a free weekend. Since Oscar was born, I hadn't spent a single night away from him. Some girlfriends were coming over for takeout pizza and wine. For the first time in years, I didn't have to be a responsible mom. That evening, I got the inevitable topic of Howard's departure out of the way so I could let my hair down. We drank, danced, and played rummy. I even smoked a few cigarettes. It was just like my college days, albeit with good wine rather than cheap vodka. As the evening wound down, it was just one friend remaining. She called an Uber, then used the upstairs bathroom. "Oscar is definitely not here, right?" she asked when she returned. "Definitely. Why do you ask?" She chuckled. "I swear I heard a kid crying up there." My blood ran cold. "What?" "It's the wine, Sosh. I'm going to regret that tomorrow." I'll admit it took me some time to go upstairs when she left. My heart raced as I pushed Oscar's bedroom door open. There were some toy cars on the floor. I asked myself, had they been left there? Oscar was usually pretty good at keeping his room tidy. The next morning, I cleared the empty wine bottles and pizza boxes with a slight headache. I lit one of my scented candles to mask the hint of tobacco that lingered. When Oscar started preschool, Howard converted our garden shed into a mini workshop. I made and sold scented candles on Etsy. It didn't break the bank, but it covered our streaming subscriptions and kept me sane when daytime boredom struck. After breakfast, I went to the shed to work on more candles. I have an electric-powered melting pot made specifically for wax. I began the process of melting small beads of soy wax, adding a pine-scented oil. I find it very relaxing. After a while, I saw the shape of someone walk past the shed window. "Hello?" I said, looking around the garden. I couldn't see anyone. "Hello?" came a voice from behind, startling me. It was a woman around mid to late 20s. "Can I help you?" I asked. "I was just looking for my son. Have you seen him?" I shook my head. "You are the first person I've seen today. Is he a friend of Oscar's?" "He is." "Sorry, I thought I knew all of his friends' parents. Oscar isn't here at the moment. He's with his dad." "I see," she said, looking disappointed. "If you give me your number, I can call you if he shows up." She shook her head. "I don't have a phone." "Oh, okay. What's your son's name?" "Lucas," she said. I couldn't contain my gasp. "Who are you?" She sighed. "Perhaps I'll come back later." She turned to leave. "Please, ma'am, I'm Sasha. Who are you?" She turned back with a slight smile. "I can see why he fell in love with you." I felt goose flesh on my arms. "Excuse me?" "I'll come back later," she said, walking away. "No, tell me who you are." I felt so uncomfortable as I was left alone in the garden. Heading back to the house. A little later, I drove to the grocery store. I triple-checked that I had locked all doors and windows before leaving, paranoid that the woman would come back. I walked down the aisles on autopilot, my head elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about her. There was a part of me that felt like I knew her from somewhere too. That evening, I sat in front of the TV but paid no attention to it. I wanted nothing more than my family back. I didn't want to be alone. As I contemplated calling a friend for company, I heard a noise coming from upstairs. My heart rate increased, but I chose to ignore it. Instead, I called a friend after all. A loud bang came from upstairs, making me freeze. I hung up as voicemail kicked in. "I'm going to call the police," I called out. My hands shook as I climbed the stairs, clinging to the steel mallet that came with our kitchen knives. I'd never used the thing before, but it was a good weapon should I need to protect myself. The sound of a child crying became clearer as I got closer to Oscar's room. I'd never been so scared as I pushed the door open to find a little boy on the floor, sniveling as he pushed toy cars around. I dropped the mallet. "Lucas?" I stuttered. "When is Oscar coming back?" He asked, not looking up. I tried to stay calm. "He'll be home from his dad's tomorrow." "Daddy is a bad man," he said. I took a step closer. "Why do you say that?" He smashed one of the cars down onto the floorboards, making me flinch. "He did a bad thing," he said. Then he slowly looked up. "Mommy?" "Oh, sweetheart," I said. "I'm not your mommy." "No," came a voice from behind me. "I am." I almost fell down as the woman from earlier passed by me, helping Lucas up. You, who are you? I said. I think you know, Sasha, she said, walking into the open closet. I don't. Get out of my house. We'll be waiting, she said. With that, the closet door slammed shut. I ran back downstairs, grabbing my phone and keys. I got in my car, struggling to get the keys in the ignition. I drove out of our neighborhood, pulling over after several minutes. It took a while, but eventually, I opened my phone and began a Google search. Imogen and Lucas, mother and son. They tragically died as a result of the car accident. Their faces and names should have stayed with me, but I'd pushed them aside in order to be stronger for my husband. He wasn't losing his mind. They were haunting us. I drove home and went back up to Oscar's room. I shivered as the closet door creaked open. Imogen and Lucas waiting. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice wavering. "I'm sorry for what happened, but it was an accident." Imogen held out her hand. "Come inside." I shook my head. "Please, leave my family alone." "Daddy did a bad thing," said Lucas. "He didn't," I yelled. "It wasn't his fault. Leave us alone." I screamed as my body was dragged into the closet by an unseen force, and the door slammed shut behind me. The lighting was low, but I could see the furious expression on Imogen's face as she grabbed my arms. "I'll show you," she said. Then everything went dark. I was in a bar with some young women. We were laughing about something. "He's been checking you out all night," one of them said to me. A handsome man was sitting alone. He smiled as I caught his eye. "I'll get us some more drinks, girls," I said, heading to the bar. I stood next to the man, offering a smile as I waited for service. "I don't usually do this kind of thing," he said, "but can I buy you a drink?" "The thing is," I said, "I'm with the girls and it's my round." "How about this round's on me?" he said, "in exchange for your number." I laughed. "That's pretty forward." "I'm only in town for a few days. You're the most beautiful woman I've seen in a long time. I'd kick myself if I didn't try." We made love in a small apartment. No, we screwed like animals. It wasn't until afterwards that I noticed the ring. "You're a bad boy, Howard," I chuckled. He grinned. "You're a hard woman to resist, Imogen." We met whenever he was in town. After some time, I fell pregnant. I didn't tell him. Instead, I became distant. It was a hard decision, but I wanted to keep the baby. I didn't think he'd understand. Months went by, and he surprised me with a visit. I couldn't hide my condition. "Jesus, I have a family," he yelled. "I can't be a part of this." "This is exactly why I didn't tell you," I screamed. "Get out." I had a baby boy, Lucas. I thought it was only fair to let Howard know. Years went by. Howard messaged me out of the blue saying he wanted to visit. I was hesitant, but I agreed. "I really want to be a part of his life," he said as Lucas played with toys. "I'm not stopping you," I said, "but I don't want him getting hurt." We'd see him every few months or so, for a day or two at a time. Lucas didn't understand why Daddy never stayed long. I couldn't explain why. "Howard, you need to tell your wife." "That's not gonna happen." "This is confusing for Lucas. It's not fair that you go home to your family, to your other son, and leave him for months at a time. Perhaps she'll be reasonable." He laughed. "You knew what the deal was, Imogen. I'm not about to screw up my marriage." Maybe I'll tell her myself then, I said. I screamed as he pushed me against the wall. Don't threaten me. Daddy, said Lucas, what are you doing? Nothing, said Howard, letting me go. Just go and play. In the weeks that followed, I thought long and hard about the situation. I decided that one way or another, I was going to let Howard's wife know about Lucas. At that point, I didn't really care about my relationship with him. I started with social media, but couldn't find anything. It wasn't too difficult to find a home address, though. They lived a few hours away. Lucas, we're going for a drive, I said late one afternoon. I got him strapped in the back of the car as light rain fell. Before leaving, I texted Howard his address, informing him we were en route. My phone blew up with calls and messages, which I ignored. As evening approached, the heavens opened, forcing me to slow down on the highway. I noticed a car behind me driving close, which started flashing its lights and beeping the horn. My phone lit up again. It was Howard. Pull over, he screamed over the car speakers. Stay back, I yelled. Pull over. Mommy, I'm scared, said Lucas. Howard, this is dangerous. Pull over then. I ended the call and put my foot down. Howard caught up and rammed into the back of us, making us both scream out. Why is Daddy doing this? Lucas cried. Because he's a bad man. Howard pulled up alongside us and turned sharply into my car. I lost control and hurtled down the bank off the highway. Lucas screamed until we came to an abrupt stop. I focused and saw a metal tower looming over us. Red lights blinking in the dark. I could feel rain on my face coming through the smashed windows. Lucas was still and silent. I tried to get free, but my legs were trapped. Lucas? I cried, but there was no answer. I grabbed my phone. Howard appeared, leaned through the window, and took it from me. You made me do this, he said, his gloved hands on the sides of my head. I took in a deep breath as I was back in the closet, overwhelmed with emotion. Imogen let go of my arms, and I almost collapsed. You see, she said, he's not what you think he is. I'm so sorry, I said, wiping away tears. It was then that I remembered the most important thing in my life. Oscar. I ran from the closet and bedroom, gasping as Imogen appeared in the hallway. They're coming home, she said. What? Howard is driving home as we speak. I checked my phone. There were several missed calls and an angry voice message from Howard. I could hear Oscar whimpering in the background. Were you ever going to tell me that Oscar's little friend is called Lucas? You didn't think that was an important thing to mention? Sasha, you let me feel like I was going insane. We're coming back. Pack some things because as far as I'm concerned, the house can burn to the ground. Oh God, I said. He's got my son. I don't know what to do. Imogen held my hands, her touch cold. You're a good mom. You'll know what to do. I headed downstairs, my heart palpitating. I must have paced back and forth until I heard a car pull up in the driveway. The front door burst open. Sasha? He yelled. I stood in the kitchen. He appeared, holding Oscar by the arm. Come here, sweetheart, I said, holding my arms out to Oscar. No, said Howard. Go upstairs and start packing. We're getting out of here. Mommy, said Oscar, clearly scared. Howard, please, I said, approaching them. You're scaring him. You're scaring me. Are you serious? Howard snapped. We're living in a haunted house and I'm scaring you? Honey, you're not yourself right now. Oscar's friend, Lucas, It's just a coincidence. He's not... Don't gaslight me, he sneered. Okay, I said. We'll leave. Let me help him, please. I reached out and put my arms around Oscar. Howard let go of his arm. Be quick about it, he said. I headed upstairs with Oscar. Did he hurt you? I asked. He shook his head. No, but he was yelling. He said that Lucas and his mommy are ghosts that want to kill us. I hugged him. Oscar, Dad has some issues right now. I promise that Lucas and his mommy are good. They don't want to hurt us, okay? He went to his room. Can I bring some toys too? He asked. Before we start packing, I need to talk to Daddy alone. I want you to stay up here with Lucas. But... Sweetheart, listen to me. Don't leave this room until I come back. Do you understand? He nodded. Yes, Mommy. I closed the bedroom door as I left, listening for a moment until I heard him talking to Lucas. Please look after my son, I said as I headed back downstairs. Where's Oscar? Said Howard. I wanted to talk to you alone, I said. I didn't want to say anything that would scare him. We don't have time for this, he said. Pack your things because we're leaving. He motioned for the stairs. I believe you, I said. He froze. What? I saw her. Who? Imogen. He covered his mouth with his hand. Oh my God. She was in there, just before you came home. I pointed to the downstairs bathroom. Howard slowly turned his head towards the door. Really? She's upset. I think it might help if you talk to her. No, he yelled. You're out of your mind. Please, Howard. She wants to be at peace. I could see his hands shake as he stomped towards the bathroom. Peace? Leave us alone if you want peace. Do you hear me? You're not welcome here. I ran and pushed Howard into the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind him. I grabbed a dining chair and wedged the back of it under the door handle as it rattled. Sasha, he screamed. Let me out of here now. I called 911, my whole body shaking as he banged on the door, screaming obscenities. Help, I yelled down the phone. My husband is trying to force my son and I to leave our home, and he did something bad. Really bad. I screamed as the wooden door splintered down the middle, then continued to split as Howard forced himself into it. The legs of the chair gave way, and the door flew open. Help! I screamed, dropping my phone. Howard charged at me. I ran out of the patio doors and headed down the dark garden towards the illuminated shed. He grabbed my hair from behind. I turned and kneed him between the legs, making him groan and stumble back. I continued running to the shed and locked the door behind me, out of breath. The first thing I noticed was the intense smell of pine and the heat. It got warm in the shed due to the melting pot, but it was considerably warm. I realized that I hadn't switched it off after using it earlier in the day, having been distracted by Imogen's garden visit. The pot was filled with liquid wax. The warning light was blinking and it was making some strange noises. The shed window shattered, a large rock hitting the floor. Howard was practically foaming at the mouth as he clambered through it. I was backed against the door, trying to get it open again. Please, Howard, I cried. Don't even think about haunting me, he sneered. The wind was knocked out of me as the door opened, and I fell onto my back. I looked up to see Howard's shocked expression as a hand gripped his shoulder from behind. No, wait, he yelled before Imogen pushed his head into the pot of wax. His arms flailed around as he made gargled sounds. She turned to look at me, then the door slammed shut. I don't know how long I was there for. It's all a bit of a blur, but it wasn't until I no longer heard Howard's struggles and the sounds of sirens got closer to the house. When I first noticed that my boyfriend was talking to himself, I didn't think much of it. Even I do it sometimes. I think most people do. He would do it so quietly, I can't even say for how long it had been going on. Maybe he had always done it. His lips moved rapidly, and his voice was barely a whisper, so for a while I thought he might be quietly humming. He would look down while doing it, while scrolling his phone, or doing chores around the house. Maybe it was a compulsion, like a tic, and I was trying to think of the kindest way to bring it up without it seeming like I was judging him. It all came to a head on Saturday. I was in the living room mindlessly scrolling on my phone while David was in the kitchen making us some food. Suddenly he ran into the room and stopped at my feet with a wild look in his eye. "Stop it!" He did not scream, but his voice was raised, like he was disciplining an unruly child. I dropped my phone on my face because I wasn't expecting him to bark a command at me like that. What? What? I'm not doing anything." I snapped back. I had no idea why he was reprimanding me for being on my phone, but his eyes weren't directed at me. He was looking directly behind me at something over my shoulder. I glanced back, but nothing was there. I kept looking between my boyfriend and the empty space behind me, trying to make sense of what was happening. He blinked rapidly and looked down at me. He seemed agitated. "I'm sorry." He shook his head and rubbed his temples. "I thought I saw something behind you." He answered slowly, still shaking his head. I sat up and snapped at him. "And what was it? There's nothing there. You scared me running in here like that." I admonished him. He kept shaking his head and backed away into the kitchen. I went back to scrolling on my phone, but I kept shooting glances at David and back behind me. It had spooked me. For the rest of the morning his whole mood seemed off. He was jumpy and he kept fidgeting with his hands, something he only does when he's upset. As noon rolled around, I suggested getting out of the apartment and getting lunch somewhere. David quickly agreed. Getting out of the house did us both good. It seemed to calm him down, and I was getting cabin fever being stuck inside for so long. Walking back to the apartment, we were holding hands, and I was leaning into him. "So, are you okay? You seemed so jumpy this morning. Do you think you saw a shadow or something?" I asked, trying to keep everything light. He looked at me cautiously, as if he was weighing what he was about to say. "I think you're right. I saw a shadow or something. Or maybe I was still dreaming." He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. I decided to drop it. I honestly thought he was embarrassed. He had gotten scared over nothing and was worried about my reaction. That night, I woke up to the sound of David talking. He was whispering, but the gentle drone of his voice had woken me up. I lay there listening. I had no intention of getting up or saying anything to him while I was still half awake. Once he stopped mumbling to himself, I would go back to sleep. During the day, I could never make out what he was saying, but tonight, I could hear him clearly even though it was just above a whisper. "I'm not going to do that to her, and you're not allowed to touch her either. You promised me. You promised me that this time would be different." His whispers were harsh and insistent. I almost said something. At this point I thought he might not even be awake. Maybe he was talking in his sleep. That's when I heard a voice answering him. It was distinct and separate. My heart started pounding even as I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. This new voice, lower and softer than David's, wasn't like anything I had heard before. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone of it, as it spoke. I couldn't tell if it was male or female, but it sounded angry. David shifted in the bed and reached over to touch my back. I didn't move, just lay there still pretending to be asleep. "You're wrong. She's still sleeping. She can't hear anything we're saying." David rasped at the voice. The voice answered back. I still couldn't make out the words, but it sounded both insistent and scathing. "Whatever. I'm done for tonight. I'm exhausted. You can talk to me tomorrow when I wake up." He hissed, and he lay back down beside me. All was silent in the bedroom. Minutes passed, and David's breathing slowed, and he started to lightly snore. He was asleep, but I couldn't join him. I felt my pounding heart just now settling down into a steady rhythm. I wanted to push myself off the bed and inspect the bedroom, but I didn't. I just lay there too afraid to get up and see what else might be in the room with us. Eventually I did fall asleep, though it was more like passing out than actual sleep. When my eyes opened, I saw the morning light streaming into the bedroom from the window. I pushed myself up into a sitting position and looked around the room. There was nothing strange in the room with me, just a pile of dirty laundry that was begging to be done. I rubbed my eyes, feeling a headache starting behind them. In the light of day, I could convince myself that I had just dreamed everything or hallucinated. Just then, David popped his head into the room and gave me a huge smile. "You slept in super late. Are you just that tired?" he asked, walking into the room and sitting down next to me. He had a cup of coffee in his hand and passed it to me. I took it gently and sipped. The warmth from the liquid was lifting my spirits. "I didn't sleep well last night. I think I was having a nightmare," I explained, sipping at the coffee. David furrowed his brow and rubbed my back. "Poor thing. You never have nightmares. Do you want to tell me what it was about?" he asked, still rubbing my back. I shrugged and kept sipping my coffee, wondering if I should confront him about last night or play it off as some kind of waking nightmare. "No, it's fading now. I can't even remember what it was about." I stood up as I spoke. I was getting hungry, and I hoped that David had saved me some breakfast. He hadn't, but that's just because he hadn't made anything yet. He had been waiting for me to wake up before he started on making something. I volunteered to make us some food, mostly because I was craving waffles, and David sucks at making them. I started searching through the cabinets and fridge for what I needed. As I was busying myself with breakfast, I glanced up and saw David staring fixedly at the corner of the living room. His lips were moving rapidly, and I knew that he was talking to himself again. I looked away. It was too early for this. I was hungry, and I needed some more coffee in me before I could deal with any kind of crazy this morning. As soon as I poured out the flour and milk, David appeared beside me, causing me to jump a little. I snapped at him because he scared me. "Jesus, David, you really gotta stop sneaking up on me like that," I hissed. I was already irritated from lack of sleep, and now he had to startle me too. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes darting from me and back to the living room. "But I thought we could go out to brunch instead." I shook my head. "I already poured out the milk and flour. I don't want it to go to waste." He licked his lips before speaking again. "Please, it'll be my treat. I just can't be in the apartment right now." He looked upset as he spoke to me. I set aside the poor, half-finished waffle mix and sighed. "Okay, let's go out and get some brunch. I could use a cappuccino and a mimosa anyway." I agreed. David kept hovering over me as I got dressed as quickly as I could. I didn't have time to brush my teeth before he rushed me out the door. He practically shoved me into the hallway. Usually, I'm all for a brunch date, but he was acting so erratic, and I was bouncing between being irritated and concerned. As we sat and ate our breakfast, I decided I needed to bring everything up. Something was worrying him, and the more I thought about the last night, the more this pit of worry was forming in my stomach. I think I just wanted him to tell me that everything was alright, that I had dreamed everything, and this was something normal I was blowing out of proportion. Last night I woke up for a little while. I thought I heard you talking to someone. I tried to say it as nonchalantly as I could. David coughed on his eggs Benedict and gave me a horrified expression. What are you talking about? I wasn't talking to anyone last night. He looked at me wide-eyed. He was a terrible liar. Babe, it's okay. If you were dreaming, or if you have some kind of tic or Tourette's, it's okay. I'm not here judging you. I'm just telling you that I've noticed, and I think I was dreaming through part of it anyway, because I thought I heard something answering you back. I reached out trying to hold his hand, but he snatched it away. You had a nightmare last night. I wasn't talking last night. I was asleep the whole time. He was sweating as he spoke, and his eyes were darting around like he was looking for someone. I sighed and went back to my breakfast. David sat his fork down and was looking everywhere except for me, his breakfast forgotten. I hadn't meant for this to happen. Maybe talking about this in a public setting was too much for him. After we paid the bill, we were walking home when David grabbed my arm and forced me to face him. His eyes had a glassy and panicked look to them. I felt a stab of panic and placed my hand on his chest, feeling his heart pounding. Honey, are you okay? You look like you're getting sick. I moved my hand to his forehead, wanting to take his temperature when he pushed my hand away. I think I should go back to my apartment for today. I think I need to be alone for a while. He stammered, backing away from me. Okay, but if you're sick, if you come back with me, I can take care of you. I pleaded. He shook his head. No, I really just need to have some time to myself. He turned and walked away, leaving me staring after him on the sidewalk. Both our apartments were in walking distance, one of the perks of living in a city. He was always at my place so often we practically lived together. It felt unnatural going back home alone. I texted him throughout the day, but I got no answer. I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. Any irritation I felt for him was gone and replaced with pure concern. As the evening wore on, I was preparing to go over to his place to confront him when he finally called me back. David, are you okay? You haven't messaged me back all day. I was getting worried. I was getting ready to come over to your place. I said in a rush. No, don't come over here. It's not safe. He spoke in a low whisper. I almost couldn't hear him. What do you mean it's not safe? Safe for who? You or me? My voice rising in alarm. For you, he sputtered. Why? You're not threatening to hurt me, are you? Or is someone else threatening to hurt me? I was shouting over the phone. This was so out of character for him, I didn't know what to think. We need to break up. He hissed back at me. You need to stay away from me. You need to stay safe. He sounded like he was crying, and with that the call ended. I stared at my phone in disbelief. I know he did not just break up with me over the phone. I called back, then again and again, straight to voicemail. I sent text messages and messages on WhatsApp, but got no reply. I spent the rest of the evening crying and only fell asleep after I took a sleeping pill just because I knew I needed the rest. Every message I sent to David was ignored. After a few days, I stopped trying. I had gotten the message loud and clear, and I wasn't going to throw myself at someone who wanted to push me away. After a few more days had passed, I started gathering all the things he had left at my apartment in a box to leave at his place. I cried while doing it. Breaking up was always hard, but I had thought our relationship was going well. Dropping off the box was harder than I had expected. I sent him a text letting him know his stuff was outside his door. At this point I was certain I was blocked, but in case he wasn't, I wanted to give him a heads up. I lingered outside his door for several minutes. Part of me wanted to knock and see if he was home. Finally, I just turned and walked away. If he wanted to talk to me, he knew where I lived, and he had my number. Come to think of it, I still needed to get my apartment key back from him. That night, I was laying on my couch, half watching a movie while I scrolled through my phone. I was deleting all the pictures of me and David. "Hello there, Amber." A soft voice purred from somewhere behind me. I gasped and leapt off the couch, clutching my phone to my chest. It sounded like someone was right beside my ear, but there was nothing. My eyes darted to the TV screen. Maybe I had heard it from there. But no one in the movie I was watching was named Amber. My heart was pounding as I tried to rationalize what I had heard. Immediately I thought of David and his weird tic, and the voice I had heard that night. I ended up staying awake most of the night. I was scared. I didn't want to be. What I was feeling was irrational, but that didn't mean it wasn't happening. I got up to leave my apartment, but I ended up just sitting back down again. Where was I going to go? It was the middle of the night, and besides a few all-night diners, everything was closed. I didn't relish the thought of sitting on an uncomfortable bar stool sipping coffee waiting till morning. Staying home seemed like the best option. I even thought about messaging David, but I stopped myself. He wasn't going to answer me anyway. I stayed on that couch till the first rays of light started to peek through the blinds. I smiled. The sunshine calmed my nerves, and I felt myself finally relaxing and drifting off to an exhausted sleep. As I closed my eyes and curled into the warmth of the sofa, I felt a hand gently pressing onto my back, the hint of claws digging through the fabric of my shirt. "Don't go to sleep yet, Amber. We have so much to talk about," the voice whispered. For the last 7 years, I've had a monster in my closet. I've never seen its face, but I know it has sickly pale hands with dirt underneath its long chipped fingernails. For a while, that was the only information I had on the being, as I would wake up some nights to see its long, slender arm reaching for my nightstand. There wasn't much on there at the time, just my lamp, whatever Harry Potter book I was reading at the time, maybe a glass of water or a bag of chips. I remember one night hearing a clatter, my eyes shooting open fast enough to see the hand slinking back into the closet, and seeing my water glass shattered on the floor. I thought it was a dream, waking up the next morning to see no glass shards on the floor. There was no glass on my nightstand either, so I was convinced I made the whole thing up until I stepped in a huge puddle of water next to my bed. I moved my nightstand to the other side of my bed that day. That was when I was 11. I'm 18 now, and for the past 7 years, I've had many sightings of the monster. There was even one night I saw it out of the closet. I'm guessing it was very early in the morning, the sun peeking through my shades. It was walking around my room, looking at the photos on my desk and the drawings on my sketchbook. It's not super tall, maybe only 5'3" in height, but it was really skinny. It had long dark hair going past its thighs, and it was very greasy. I think it heard me wake up, though, as I was only looking at it for a few seconds before it silently crept out of my room. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I tell my parents? Well, at first I did. After the first incident with the water glass, I asked my mom if she cleaned up the glass shards next to my bed. She was confused, so I told her what I saw, and she just chalked it up to a combination of me dreaming and knocking it over accidentally. Well, that didn't explain the missing glass. I figured I wasn't going to get very far with her. When I asked my stepdad to move my nightstand later that day, he asked me why. I told him the same thing I told my mother, saying that it was something that was living in my closet. My stepdad chuckled, telling me I needed to stop watching so many horror movies. He was right. For an 11-year-old, I was very well versed in the genre of horror. Maybe that was why I wasn't all that scared every time I saw or heard the monster. After the first 2 years, I kind of got used to sharing my room with the monster. And it wasn't always there. It only really showed up during the winter months. When I was younger, I used to think that whatever monster realm it spawned from had a really nasty winter, and it came to my closet to get warm. At the time, I didn't realize how close to the truth I actually was. Before I get to today's events, I should mention one more thing about the monster. I wouldn't really interact with it directly. It wouldn't ever touch me or speak to me, but there was one time where it contacted me. This was when I was 15. I had just moved my nightstand to the other side of my bed, so it was closer to the outlet where I would charge my phone. Consequently, it was also next to the closet again, and I thought about what had happened that night with the water. The monster was clearly just trying to get something to drink, even being nice enough to partially clean their mess up. In a moment of quick thinking, I grabbed a plastic water bottle and a sleeve of Ritz crackers from the kitchen and left them on my nightstand. I fell asleep rather quickly that night, and to my surprise, I didn't wake up once. When I did wake up, however, I glanced over to my nightstand. The plastic water bottle was gone, and the sleeve of Ritz crackers was mostly empty. Something else was different too. I noticed as I began to pack my backpack for school that day. I grabbed the copy of The Shining that was sitting on my nightstand, and I noticed there was a yellow smiley face sticker smack dab in the middle of the cover. I guess that was the monster's way of saying thanks. But it never did anything like that again. It would just take the food and water that I would leave on there, disappearing as soon as it became the morning. I'm leaving for college in a month, and I know that once I leave here, I'll probably never see the monster again. What had been bothering me for weeks was the fact that the monster hadn't left my closet once it became the summer like it usually did. It also hadn't been drinking or eating much in the past month. One day I was picking out a sweater. A pungent and repulsive smell filled my nose as I opened the closet. I found the source of it. My new favorite sweatshirt, now with a huge stain on the front of it. I blamed it on the dog and put it in the laundry room, but I knew something was changing with the monster. Today I did something that I wasn't ever planning on doing, and I confronted it. I left out my usual snack and water and lied awake, waiting until I heard the knob turn and the door creak open. As I watched the monster's arm fumble around in the darkness to grab the bowl of grapes, I left for it. I quickly leapt up and swung the door open all the way. I'm not sure what I was expecting. Was I expecting to see nothing but my clothes, the monster being a figment of my imagination the whole time, or maybe a ghastly figure with devilish red eyes, and a large mouth full of jagged teeth? Either way, I wasn't expecting to be faced with something that was more frightened of me than I was scared of it. Looking up at me, crouched on my pile of crew neck sweatshirts, was what looked like a young woman, a few years older than me presumably. Her hazel eyes were bloodshot with large purple bags underneath them, and her face was sunken in. Her lips were chapped, and I saw a full set of yellow teeth behind them. Her skin was pale, as I already knew, and her long hair was more of a dark brown, very knotted and tangled. Almost instantly she tried to shut the closet again, but I was clearly stronger than her and kept it open. Her eyes darted from me to my bedroom door, seeming to be weighing the options of running for it. "What are you?" I questioned, my voice coming out shaky because honestly, I couldn't believe what was happening. Almost immediately after I asked the question, I knew I shouldn't have worded it like that. She was a who, not a what. She began to tear up and whispered, "Please don't tell anyone." I wasn't sure what that meant, but for some reason, I felt that I had the upper hand on the monster who I had been wary of for the past few years. I asked my question again, saying who this time, and blocking her exit until I would get an answer. She reached into the pocket of the tattered gray sweatpants she was wearing and handed me a piece of paper folded into quarters. I unfolded it, and what I saw had me dumbfounded. It depicted my mother and her late ex-husband, but much younger, taking what looked like a family photo, but it wasn't with me. It was with a young girl who had a wide smile on her face. Her hazel eyes complemented nicely with her burgundy dress. Her dark brown hair was in a nice braid with a bow on the end. I looked up at the woman sitting in my closet, the eyes exactly the same as the girl in the photo. "My name is Emily. That's me with my parents. Your mother." She pointed over to my desk, where there was a photo of my mother and I at my most recent art show. I looked at the woman with confusion, as my mom never mentioned having another daughter. "Something happened to my dad. There was an argument or something. I heard a lot of shouting." Emily was looking at me with her eyes wide. "I was supposed to be sleeping over my neighbors, but I got homesick. I let myself in and then I saw..." She trailed off, beginning to choke up. "I saw my dad. He was on the ground and there was so much blood." Emily started sobbing, and in her eyes I could see that she was reliving the moment as if it had just happened. I didn't want to believe her. The woman in her story, her mom, my mom. It couldn't be my mom. She was a normal mom, a boring mom. I screamed and then I just ran. I kept running. I don't even remember where I ended up. All I know is that my mom heard me, and she ran after me for a while, but I never went back. I didn't want to think about it, until I learned about you." She looked up at me, tears still in her eyes. She reached deeper into her pocket and pulled out a newspaper clipping. Faded, but the picture was still somewhat visible. I recognized it immediately. It was me and my mom when I won my first award for my work. I was only 7 years old, so the Times had done a big story on it. "You tracked me down?" I asked Emily, becoming more and more concerned with how sane she truly was. Emily nodded. "I originally wanted to warn you, but one day I saw how she interacted with you, and it was like she was a completely different person. I couldn't just rip you away from a mom that loved you." Her eyes narrowed, but I had found her. I had to make sure she was different. I was only planning on staying in your shed for a few nights, but it just got so cold. The both of us stopped. We both heard the same thing. The sound of footsteps. Coming downstairs. Coming down to my room. Emily's eyes widened, whispering, "It's her." She quickly retreated back into the closet, something I had assumed she'd done hundreds of times over. The footsteps stopped in front of my door and I heard a soft tapping. "Honey, are you awake?" I froze, managing to croak out a "yeah," before quickly moving away from the closet. The door slowly opened and my mom peeked her head in, a soft smile on her face. "What are you doing up, hon? It's late," she inquired, turning the lamp on beside my door. I wish she hadn't done that, because as soon as she did, her eyes darted down to my right hand, which was still clutching the family photo of Emily. I'm not sure what emotion passed over her face for a fleeting second, whether it was worry or something more sinister, but it only happened for a moment. I thought I heard voices. You shouldn't be up watching shows this late. She looked over at my computer, something I'm usually binging The Office on, but it was closed and plugged in for the night. She looked back at me as I quickly shoved the photo and the newspaper clipping in my pocket, and her smile dropped. Go to sleep, sweetie. She turned off the lamp and shut the door, and I heard the sound of her footsteps walking away from my room. But she didn't go back upstairs. It's like she was just standing at the end of the hallway, like she was waiting for something. I didn't open the closet again. I don't know what to do. I came on here wondering if anyone has any advice. The monster in my closet is apparently my half-sister, and I still have a month left in the house with my mother, someone who's been lying to me and my stepfather my whole life. What on earth am I supposed to do? It was the worst blizzard since 1975 here in Wisconsin. They are calling it the storm of the century. The blizzards here are brutal. A few years ago, there was one so bad that traffic came to a dead stop. After being on that frozen highway all night, I try to hunker down when there's a blizzard. Just me and my German Shepherd, Max. We've mostly been watching movies to pass the time. Then suddenly, right in the middle of watching The Godfather, I heard a knock at my door. Max went ballistic. This was an unusual reaction from him. It startled me. My house is pretty secluded off a remote highway, so I don't get many visitors, even in good weather, leaving me to wonder who's out at 10 p.m. in this weather. I grabbed my pistol and tucked it in my waistband before heading to the door. Who's out there? I asked. After a brief moment of silence, I got a reply. Hey there, my name's Carl. My truck slid off the highway a couple miles back. I came out here looking for shelter. Do you mind if I stay here? I watched Carl through the peephole before responding. I couldn't tell what, but something about him just seemed off. Something wasn't quite right about him. I brushed it off. I figured I'd probably look a little odd after walking a couple miles through a tundra. Alright, get in here, Carl. I said, opening the door for him. The wind outside was howling, making it tough to shut the door behind him. Max really went postal at Carl when he entered. Max was usually a little weary of strangers, but once I'd invite them in, he would settle down. Except that didn't happen this time. I tried to calm him down, but I couldn't. I decided it would be best to put him in the bedroom for a while. When I came back out, Carl was taking his snow-covered coat off. You got real lucky, Carl. There is a lot of less trusting folk around here. Sorry about the dog. He's not usually like that. Thanks, Carl said, shivering. Hey, what are you doing out driving around in the second day of the storm? You should have stayed home. Real dangerous to be going out for anything in weather like this. My power went out. I was trying to make it to my brother's house, but it probably wasn't my best idea. He seemed to be telling the truth, as far as I could tell, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about this guy. Max was still going crazy in the other room. It was starting to concern me. Alright, do you want some coffee to warm you up? I asked. He nodded his head in response. When I turned around to pour him a cup, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew there was something off with this guy, but I couldn't tell what. I'm just being paranoid. I tried to reassure myself as I handed him the mug. I hit play on the movie, and it started playing again in the background. As Carl held the warm mug in his hands, I watched him intently. My phone vibrated. It was an emergency alert that read, "Warning, do not let any strangers into your house. Murderer out pretending to seek refuge from storm." I looked back up to Carl. He sat there just looking at his mug. I started to walk to the other room. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yeah, I just gotta grab something real quick." I opened the door to the bedroom where Max was and grabbed my shotgun. Max followed me back to the kitchen, barking as we approached Carl. I racked the shotgun, loading a slug into the chamber. "Hands up and turn around slowly," I ordered. He sat there for a moment before moving. He stood up and turned around, looking me in the eye. "What's this all about?" he asked innocently. "It's time for you to leave." "Please, no. I'll freeze." "I'm sorry, but you need to leave. Now." It was in that moment Carl smiled. That's when I realized what was off about him. His mouth had too many teeth. Way too many teeth. They were sharp and jagged. Then he charged at me. He was quick. Almost too quick. I just barely had time to pull the trigger before he reached me. The shot knocked him to the floor and left a large hole in his chest, but no blood came out. He looked back up at me and grinned even wider now as he tried to get up. I fired again, leaving a hole in his skull, but it was clear to me that the shotgun wasn't going to stop this guy for long. I ran to the door, slid on my boots, and ran. Max followed close behind. As I hopped on my snowmobile, he hopped onto my sled in the back. We took off. I zipped through the woods. The snow was deep and I was getting pelted in the face by snow and twigs. We didn't make it too far before I hit something and lost control. I flew through the air and into a tree. I woke up to Max trying to drag me by my coat. I struggled to get up. My head was spinning and I was running off sheer adrenaline. I made it to my feet and I could hear twigs snapping in the distance behind me. Max and I took off running through the woods. It was difficult with well over a foot of snow on the ground. My lungs burned and my legs felt like jello, but we pressed on, unsure of how close that thing was. After what felt like hours, we came to a clearing. I could see a light in the distance. It was a house. I felt a sense of relief as we ran towards it. When we got to the house, I pounded on the door. "Please help," I yelled out. After a few long moments, the door opened. Suddenly there was a gun in my face. Max started growling. "Quiet," I told him, and he settled down. I pleaded with the man in the doorway. "Please help me. I let that thing into my house. I let it into my house. It's not human." The man didn't lower his gun before responding. "I heard about you on the news. Get out of here before I shoot you." "No, please, you don't understand. I let him in my house. He almost got me." "Go now and take your friend back there with you." I turned around to see that thing approaching. "No, no, no, no. That's the thing that's killing people. Watch this." I pulled my pistol out of my waistband and fired 3 shots into its chest. It keeps approaching, unfazed with a wicked grin on its face. "You see that? That thing's not human. Please help me," I pleaded with him. "Alright, get in here quick," he replied quickly. I looked out the door as Max entered behind me, to see it getting even closer. What do we do? What do we do? Well, shooting it doesn't seem to do much to it. Maybe it's like a Wendigo, and we need to burn it. He starts grabbing various bottles of liquor from a cabinet and starts pouring them on the floor in a circle around his living room. We'll lure the thing into the circle, and once he's in, we'll light him up like a Christmas tree. Suddenly, the door was ripped from its hinges. We started shooting as it approached with a grotesque smile on its face. The moment it entered the circle, I grabbed a burning log from the fireplace. The creature's smile faded quickly as it grimaced. But it was too late for the creature as I threw the burning log on the ground in front of it, setting it ablaze. It made a horrible, ear-piercing screech as it was engulfed in flames. The flames quickly spread, setting the house ablaze. We ran outside to escape the flames. We both collapsed into the snow, coughing from the smoke. "Sorry about your house," I said to the man. "It's all right. I have insurance." He chuckled back. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of relief that was quickly interrupted by a man who came out of the forest and said, "A house fire in a blizzard now? That's just bad luck. Any chance you two have seen my brother Carl?" He smiled as he approached, revealing a mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth. A few days ago, I got a letter in the mail. My name and address were scrawled on the envelope in large, shaky capital letters. There was no return address. I brought it into my house with the rest of my mail and opened it. Inside there was a small piece of paper about the size of a credit card that simply read, "Hello." It was written with those same shaky capital letters that adorned the envelope. I turned the paper over and found nothing written on the back. The envelope was empty too. This random piece of paper with one word was all that was there, and I had no idea who sent it or why. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to being one of those handwritten church letters I'd sometimes get, and just left it on my counter with the rest of the junk mail I was too lazy to throw out. I then sat on my couch and watched TV for a while before going to bed, the letter completely forgotten at this point. After a decent night's sleep, I clumsily felt around my end table, trying to grab my phone and check the time. Instead, my hand brushed against a piece of paper. I don't remember having any papers there, so out of curiosity I grabbed it, figuring it'd be a random receipt or something. It was not a receipt. It was a credit card-sized piece of paper with the word "Hello" written on it in shaky capital letters. I was confused. I could have sworn I left that on the counter last night. Clutching the paper, I went to my pile of junk mail. I found the envelope there, but not the paper. Alright, so this is the same piece of paper, but I still had no idea how it got into my room. As I was trying to figure that out, my cat, Craig, rubbed up against my leg and meowed. I took a quick glance at his food bowl and saw that, as I expected, the bottom was visible. Craig is never this affectionate unless he was hungry. "Alright, I'll feed you," I said, petting Craig's head. As I poured some food in Craig's bowl, I figured that maybe Craig knocked the paper down and the AC or something blew it into my room. At the moment, that made the most sense, so I went with that explanation. As Craig chowed down, I turned the piece of paper over in my hand. It was just a small piece of paper with one word on it. What was the point of it? And who sent it? After considering these questions for a moment, I crumpled up the piece of paper and threw it out. Honestly, I didn't care that much, and I had better things to do with my time than unravel this mystery. As if on cue, my phone reminded me of one of those better things. A date I had tonight with my boyfriend, George. We hadn't been going out for too long, but I really liked him, and was excited to see him again. We were going to have dinner together at an upscale restaurant tonight, and I still needed to get everything ready. I got my car washed and cleaned inside and out, picked up some flowers, and then got myself ready. I met George at the restaurant. I gave him the flowers, which made him blush, and then we had a very nice, if expensive, dinner. After dinner, we got into my car and started making out. Soft, quick kisses soon turned long, passionate, and intense. George started pushing me against the driver's side door while kissing me. As he was adjusting himself, he accidentally put his hand into one of my car's cup holders. I heard a slight crinkling of paper. What the? I know I cleaned out my car, and I know for a fact there were no random wrappers, receipts, or napkins in this car. George seemed to sense my confusion and stopped. "Everything okay?" he asked between heavy breaths. "Yeah," I said. I just don't know how there's a piece of paper in here. I swear I cleaned this out before we met up tonight. George chuckled. It's fine, babe, he said, picking it up. You probably just missed something. It happened. It's probably just some receipt. George's voice trailed off as he read it. What is it? I asked. You tell me, he answered, giving me the paper. Written on the small, credit card-sized paper was a phone number with the name Dylan, written in handwriting I was all too familiar with. I stared at it blankly. Did this hello guy break into my car just to put this here? There was no sign of a break-in. Did George do this? Is this some joke? What was going on? So, he said, his arms crossed. Who's Dylan? I have no idea, I stammered. Then how come you have his number? George looked genuinely upset. I don't think he was behind this. Okay, I said, trying to figure out how to explain this. So, George gave me a look that said, come on, get to it already. Alright, so I got this letter in the mail from someone I do not know, and it had a piece of paper that only said hello, and then the paper somehow got into my room, and then I thought Craig moved it there somehow, and threw it out, and now the person behind that piece of paper somehow put this in my car because it has the same writing style. I said in a rush. George took a second to take it all in. That's certainly an explanation, he said. It's the truth, I swear, I said. Alright, you believe me? George shrugged. It's an insane explanation, but I'm willing to go with it for now. I breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, I said. We both sat silently for a moment before I asked, so, wanna pick up where we left off? George shook his head. Not really in the mood anymore. Sorry. I should probably get home, actually. George gave me a quick peck goodbye, and then went back to his car. Meanwhile, I sat in my car staring at the piece of paper. I racked my brains trying to figure out if I knew anyone named Dylan. I think I had a friend in elementary school named Dylan. Or was it Declan? Considering he used to put crayons up his nose, I doubt he was clever enough to pull off something like this. I really didn't want to look into this further. I wanted to move on with my life and focus on other things. But this, whatever this is, seems to want my attention. And they did give me a way to contact them. I dialed the number from the paper into my phone. It rang a couple of times and then someone picked up. Hello? I said. Hello? The voice on the other end sounded artificial, like one of those text-to-speech programs. It stressed each syllable like they were separate words. Who is this? I asked. Hello? The voice repeated. How do you know me? Hello? And with that, the call dropped. I tried calling again, but got a "this number is no longer in service" message. Annoyed, I decided to Google the number and the name Dylan. It led me to someone named Dylan Rogers. A little more Googling led me to discover that Dylan was recently found dead in his home. No one knows who did it, and the case is still ongoing. The only lead cops have is that Dylan was found holding a credit card-sized piece of paper in his hand, but it was too covered in blood to make anything out of it. This information rattled around in my head as I drove home. I had no idea what to do with it. Do I call the cops? Hello, 911. Yes, I keep getting a piece of paper that say hello on them, except for one that had a name and a phone number that belonged to a dead guy. Why no? I haven't had anything to drink. Why do you ask? Yeah, that'd go great. A part of me wanted to call George and tell him about this, but I decided against it. It'd just look like me trying to add on to an already ridiculous excuse. I wasn't sure who to tell about this. My friends were all busy, and my family disowned me after I came out. I was basically on my own. I decided I'd investigate this more when I got home, maybe even submit my situation as a tip in the Dylan Rogers case. I just knew I had to do something. After a very stressful drive, I finally got home. As soon as I walked inside, I noticed something felt off. I turned on the lights. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" Nothing. Dead quiet. I slowly made my way from my living room into the kitchen. I could see Craig's silhouette lying on the floor in the kitchen, probably sleeping. As I stepped into the kitchen, my foot slipped on something. I grabbed a counter for balance. What did I slip on? I know my floors were clean when I left. I turned on the kitchen lights and discovered two things. First, Craig wasn't sleeping. He was gone. His throat had been brutally sliced open. His eyes were still open, stuck in abject terror. Second, I know what I slipped in. Craig's blood. The blood itself wasn't splattered randomly on the floor. No, it was used to write out a message on the floor. It was a simple message, only being one word, written in large, shaky capital letters. Hello. It had been a week since I won my town's special mayoral election. Tonight was my swear-in ceremony. I was so giddy with excitement, mixed with more nervous than I have ever felt. I was checking the mirror, looking for anything that was less than perfect. My hair groomed and slick. My suit was finely pressed, my face clean-shaven, although I had a small nick showing on my neck. I brushed down my jacket to get any lint off when my partner came in. "Stop fussing over it." Antonio brushed my hands away and straightened my jacket right. "You look fabulous." I was never sure if I did look good, but his praise meant the world to me. "I feel like I'm gonna pass out," I warned. As the time got closer, my heart pounded harder until it threatened to break through my chest entirely. "Everything's going to be fine," he whispered reassuringly. I looked into his pure blue eyes, so clear like looking at a summer sky on a cloudless day. No hint of darkness in sight. He always had a way of making me feel hopeful. It's one of the things I love about him. With nightfall quickly approaching, we left quickly toward our park. With everyone gathered as well, we all marched forward like a procession, with me leading the front. We eventually met up with our current mayor, Jonathan Fitzhugh, standing under the gazebo. As I got closer, I noticed our own Reverend Hawthorne walking beside me with his worn-out leather Bible clenched in his hands. He prayed with a look of defeat on his face. Like praying wouldn't do anything, but he didn't know what else to do. I stood right next to the Mayor Fitzhugh, looking way less than the man he used to be. His auburn hair had prematurely aged, and his eyes sagged with the weight of many a sleepless night. His 4-year term, and how it all would end, weighed heavily on him. Our local sheriff had pulled up to the gazebo, ready to transport us. I got inside the cruiser first, the cage separating him from me. Outside the cruiser, Rev. Hawthorne was saying a prayer and blessing Fitzhugh for what would be his last act of mayor. Out in the crowd, Fitzhugh's wife and 2 young children had come forward. She had bravely played along until a tsunami of tears erupted from her eyes. She clutched him tightly and wept into his chest. The children hugged their father too, knowing that they'd never see him again. My heart went out to them, and I suddenly wished I had never been chosen for this. Not when it means separating a loving family like this. Fitzhugh gave his last smiles and goodbyes and joined me in the back seat. We were driven out of town and to the countryside. The ride had felt like an eternity as we all went silent. Something like this was too heavy for casual conversation. I kept glancing at Fitzhugh, while he just looked out the window, taking in every detail the night had played before him. I looked at the sheriff, and he too had a stoic face, concentrating on the destination. We reached the mile marker on the back road, and the dirt path leading into the forest. Fitzhugh and I got out while the sheriff stayed behind. Our hike in the forest was just as quiet as the car ride, with only the breaking of twigs underfoot. We got closer as the thick stench of gas and underlying rot wafted in my nose until it became a full-on assault. It was the first time I had seen the bogland. And more than that, decayed bodies littered the wetlands as far as I could see before being engulfed by thick fog. Fitzhugh looked downward at the bog, and the dead faces stared up back at him. There was faint, but unmistakable sloshing coming from the bog below. What scared me most, and surely what Fitzhugh noticed, was that in this place of rot and death, there was the sound of movement in the water. "You need to do it," he told me, not looking away from the bog. While the sound of splashing got louder, I knew what I needed to do, but I protested inside. He just stood there, overlooking the swamp and its denizens. A slight breeze could topple him over, and I would have preferred that. Instead, I steeled myself and I shoved him downhill. He rolled down like a giant rag doll until he splashed into the bog. As if on cue, the bodies moved towards Fitzhugh while he drowned. In an instant they swarmed him and dragged him below the surface. A few air bubbles broke through before the water went completely still. After a while, all the dead faces resurfaced, giving the bog a nightmarish polka dot pattern. Fitzhugh's face was the newest addition to this congregation. With that, the sacrifice was over, and now the town was safe for the time being. As Fitzhugh's lifeless eyes looked back at me, I had suddenly wished I wasn't shouldered with this responsibility. There is something wrong with my family. When I walked through the door after spending 2 days at a slumber party, the house smelled of bacon. Mom was actually cooking dinner, which was crazy because Mom never cooked dinner. She was either at work, locked in her home office on the ground floor, or in her room complaining of a migraine. We never ate Mom's cooking because she never cooked for us. My brother Fitz once joked she would cook us an Excel spreadsheet or throw her iPhone in the air fryer to make a stew. He was almost right. A few months ago, Mom microwaved her iPad. We weren't really an eating together type of family. Sure, we had the white picket fence and family SUV. We greeted our neighbors every day with nuclear family smiles. Mom was the head of her book club on her days off, and Dad worked in an office. From the outside, we were your average Brady Bunch. My best friend had even commented on it. "Ruby, your family is so close. I wish mine were like yours." Close couldn't have been further from the truth. Keeping up appearance is all we had to do in front of the locals. I smiled my biggest smile and wore my hair in a perfect ponytail. Fitz and Cassie followed suit, playing their part as nuclear children. That is what Mom wanted us to be. However, our dollhouse wasn't as perfect as perceived. Inside our so-called forever home, we were a disconnected group of lodgers. Mom barely spoke to us, and when she did, she was enforcing yet another rule. Don't go into the living room unsupervised. Don't go into the basement. Don't eat food outside of the kitchen. Don't wear your shoes inside. Mom had different rules tailored to each of us. For me, I wasn't allowed electronics after 8 p.m. Fitz, who was 1 year older, had a set curfew of 9 p.m. Cassie could only eat fruit and vegetables on Wednesday. Snacks, candy, and chocolate were banned for all of us. We weren't even allowed to sit on the living room couch. Mom was terrified of us ruining it, so we had beanbags. When I first got a whiff of bacon, I was convinced either our house was burning down, or my brother had finally gotten tired of his Uber Eats diet. Fitz wasn't a cook, though. Christmas 2019, his turkey dinner gave us all food poisoning. I was slipping out of my shoes and hanging up my jacket when a familiar voice tinkered from the kitchen. "Ruby, sweetie, I'm making dinner if you're hungry." It smelled amazing, whatever it was. I was in disbelief, walking into the kitchen to find my mom standing over a bubbling pan. "Can you set the table, honey?" Fitz and Cassie joined us, followed by Dad. "Smells good, Mom." Fitz jumped into his seat with a grin, which was definitely odd for him. Normally the guy took 5 working days to sit down. Cassie slid past me, ruffling my hair. "Hey, sis." My family were acting different in general. Cassie was unusually smiley, not the bratty teenager she usually was, while my brother dropped his patronizing smirk and "I'm better than you" attitude for a more laid-back vibe. Usually, my brother and sister were insufferable. Cassie always had to bring up how much she hated all of us. Fitz wouldn't rest until he had the last word, and Dad's face was beet red. Now, it was like they'd had a personality purge. Fitz caught my eye, his lips curling into a smile. "Yo." He saluted me with 2 fingers, which was not my brother. Fitz Setori greeted me with a scowl or a pretentious movie quote. Before I left for the slumber party, he wouldn't shut up about a black and white French movie only he had seen. If Cassie and I liked a movie, he hated it. If he liked something, Fitz would make sure we didn't like it. My brother's wardrobe was like he was trying to cosplay Sherlock Holmes, and I still didn't understand how he had friends at school. The thing with my siblings was, I missed them. It used to be the 3 of us versus the world, and our dictator-like mother. But since starting high school, Fitz had turned into this pretentious film freak with an obsession with being right, and Cassie was 16 going on 21. Presently, my brother's demeanor was more relaxed, not the stiff, uptight BS he usually was, always trying to get ahead of the conversation and prove himself right. In the corner of my eye, I could have sworn something flashed, a bright light filling the edges of my vision, like a Polaroid was being taken. Fitz didn't notice. Leaning over the table, he stabbed his fork into my steak, speaking through a mouthful of mashed potato. "Are you eating this?" I shook my head, watching in disbelief as he took my whole plate, inhaling my food too. Cassie, who was always glued to her phone, gave him a playful shove. Well, that was weird. The 2 of them couldn't go one day without trying to rip each other's heads off. I don't know what baffled me more. Seeing my siblings sitting together, shoulder to shoulder instead of avoiding each other like the plague, or the fact that Cassie was yet to announce that she hated all of us, and couldn't wait until college, which usually followed with Fitz saying, "What college?" and ending up with a face full of food. But it didn't end there, because when they were sent to their rooms, they continued, snapping at each other with passive-aggressive remarks until they were physically trying to murder one another. The craziest part is the 2 of them used to be so close. If Cassie didn't throw a death threat at Fitz, it wasn't a normal Setori dinner. Now I was watching them nudge each other like they knew something I didn't. "Okay, what happened while I was away?" I spoke up, toying with my fork. Mom settled me with a smile. "What do you mean?" I bit my tongue, waiting for Dad to intervene with a cough. When we did eat together, which was rare, Dad wasn't a fan of talking at the table. When I risked a look at him, though, Dad was happily chewing through his meal. He caught my eye, grinning through steak juices running down his chin. "Isn't it a wonderful day?" He nodded for me to continue, a crunching noise twisting my gut. Dad was grinding through the steak bones. He stopped, slowly inclining his head. Ruby, are you okay, darling? I felt my fingers tighten around my fork. Dad never called me darling. He made it clear I wasn't the favorite child, making little effort with me when I was a kid in favor of Fitz and Cassie. It was always those two who he had spent time with. I remember sitting outside the basement door with cookies, waiting for Cassie and Fitz to come back up the stairs. They were down there for hours, sometimes a whole day. The only bonding I did with my father was when I snuck down there myself. Dad was always working, so I stuck around, usually spinning around in his chair or poking things I shouldn't poke. I was still struggling to process darling, mashed potato creeping back up my throat when Fitz kicked me under the table. His smile was unnerving me. The way he and Cassie kept grinning at each other, like they knew something I didn't. It was just like when we were kids. Fitz was trembling, trying, and failing to hold in laughter. "What's going on, Ruby?" He choked before bursting into childlike giggles. Cassie joined in, her smile stretching wider and wider. Something ice cold trickled down my spine. Too many teeth. "We never have dinner together," I said pointedly, glancing at Mom, "unless you're impressing a work colleague." I turned to Fitz. "You barely come out of your room, and when you do, you're insufferable." Fitz only smirked, and I moved on to Cassie, who wasn't fooling me with her innocent smile with far too many teeth. "And you only come downstairs when you want something." There was a pause before Fitz exploded into laughter. Cassie started giggling, and to my confusion, even Mom was trying to hide her smile. My rule-obsessed, fun-hating mother was barely holding in her own hysterics. Dad wasn't laughing. Dad was still grinding bones between his teeth. I stood up, which made my brother howl harder. "What's so funny?" My family didn't respond, snorting like middle schoolers. I snatched my plate up from Fitz. "You're all sociopaths." I waited for the inevitable chastising for swearing. I stubbed my toe a few weeks ago, accidentally saying the F word, and Mom almost had a nervous breakdown. She said my vulgar language was a problem that would be solved by taking away my phone for a week, but this time, Mom didn't even notice. She was still eating, stifling her own Snickers. I was planning on heading to my room, but I couldn't help it, making a detour down the hallway. Dad always told me to look at the teeth. Too many teeth was bad. Too many teeth meant something was wrong. Mom immediately noticed, her shadow following me, another flash of light behind me, and this time I could hear a shutter sound. "Ruby, where are you going?" Twisting around, my mother was smiling at me. I blinked, and the hallway I had known my whole life suddenly appeared warped, like it wasn't real, like it was slowly closing in on me, and my destination was getting further away. With panic rising in my chest, my hands searched for a door that was no longer there, bleeding into the wallpaper. Another flash. This time it was brighter, filling the dark with light that didn't make sense, a blinding white blur fraying the edges of my vision. But where was the camera? "Ruby." I blinked again. Mom was standing closer, her smile wider. "Is there something wrong?" I found my voice. "What was that light?" Mom did a slow head incline, mimicking my brother. "What light?" I was growing progressively more paranoid, my hands shaking. "Is someone taking photos of me?" I whispered. Mom's plastic grin didn't waver. "Photos? What do you mean, sweetie?" I managed to shake my head, pushing past her. "Nothing," I said. "I'm okay. I'm just tired." Mom nodded, and I could hear Fitz giggling behind me. When I looked, however, there was nobody there. Still, my brother's shrieks of laughter followed me all the way to my room, only stopping when I slammed the door. 4:01 a.m. There was a figure standing in my doorway. I thought it was a trick of the mind, but no. There was someone standing inside my room, peeking through their hands. For a disorienting moment, I was frozen. I couldn't move. Fitz? When I sat up, I was blinded by that same light, the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter filling the silence. The figure didn't have a face, a shadow hanging over my bed, but looking closer, it did have wide, laughing eyes peeking through its fingers, keeping my gaze glued to the figure, who was very slowly uncovering its eyes like playing a game of peekaboo. I reached to switch on the light. The shadow ran away, though I definitely saw my brother's dark red hair. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up. The laughing had stopped, but I could still see Fitz's unmoving shadow, his feet under the door, all night. Obviously, I called him out on it the next morning. "What were you doing last night?" I demanded, trying to force down toast. Fitz acted oblivious, because of course he did. "What did I do?" he teased, wearing that smirk I wanted to carve off his face. "You stood outside my door all night." Fitz chuckled into his glass of juice. "You can't prove it." Mom was yet to get ready for work, eating cereal from the box. She was halfway through a bottle of wine when I came down for breakfast, laughing hysterically at a refrigerator commercial. Usually my mom was gone before I woke up, not to mention we weren't allowed to eat cereal for breakfast. It was always health food crap. "Mom?" I gritted out. Cassie was making coffee behind us, joining in with the theatrics. My sister hated coffee. "Mom!" I yelled when my brother winked at me. Mom ignored my complaints, kissing the rim of her glass. "Be a doll and go get Mommy's favorite vino from the basement." She downed the rest of her wine, tipping her head back and blowing strands of hair from her eyes. "You know," she sighed, "the expensive one." "Don't you have a job to go to?" I glanced at my phone. "It's almost 8. Mom rolled her eyes. "Maybe later." My workaholic mother, who went to work with gastritis and had even forced Fitz to go to school with the flu, was acting like a drunken teenage girl. Mom's whole life revolved around perfect attendance. She scanned our report cards for tardies, threatening our phone privileges if we were a minute late for class. Suddenly, I was the one who felt like a mother. "Mom, you need to go to work." "Yeah, Mom." Fitz mocked my voice, leaning his chin on his fist. "You need to go to work." Mom settled me with a patient smile. I thought she would get mad, though she seemed amused. "Mommy wants a drink, darling. Fetch me the wine." I nodded, standing up. Anything to get away from these psychopaths. My siblings' laughter followed me, once again out of the kitchen, down the hallway, before stopping abruptly when I stepped in front of the basement door. Reaching out with shaking hands, I grasped the handle. I hadn't been down to the basement in a while for a number of reasons. Heading down stone-cold steps, I used my phone light to navigate the darkness. I remembered the exact way I used to jump down them as a kid, 2 at a time, squeezing the handrail tightly. Sometimes Cassie joined me, the two of us holding hands. I recalled the time we used to run up and down the Miller family stairs. Cassie and I would sing a song, the two of us giggling nervously. 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4. I can hear a human knocking on the floor. There was no sign of my mother's expensive vino when I stepped inside the Setori family basement. It was exactly how I remembered it. A single observation bed, my dad's desk filled with research. I wasn't supposed to look at them because it was dangerous. Instead, I focused on the strange-looking machines and rows of metal shelves filled with an assortment of jars. When he was 15, Fitz opened one up. He didn't tell me what was in it, but he was violently sick for days. Further into the basement, I could sense their shuddering breaths. "Do not look, Ruby," Dad always told me, but I couldn't help it. Risking a glance, the breath catching in my throat, 5 slumped figures, each of them brutally tied back to back under a single buzzing bulb. My parents' prisoners. Riley and Connor Setori with their teenage children, Fitz and Cassie, and then of course the girl who made me. The reason why I was alive and breathing. Ruby Setori. I want to preface this by saying it was never my choice that I became Ruby. Dad was insistent, and as a kid, I followed my parents. My family and I were born in a lab of mimics. There were 3 mimic families, though we were the only survivors. I've only ever known mimicking and being forced from person to person. It's kind of like shape-shifting, but we need human bodies and voices to survive. Human voices make us real. My siblings were born after me, but something was wrong with them. I don't really remember it, but I used to live in a white room with sponge walls. Fitz and Cassie were in the room next to me. The people in white spoke of failures and more tests, and my brother was so weak, while my sister was spitting up blood. They concluded that their original forms were dying. A default body for a mimic is a faceless being with no discernible features. A shadow you swear you see in the corner of your vision, what you think is a trick of the mind. With my old body, I could explore the darkness and creep into the corner of any human's eye. I started to get better. Voices were hard at first. You have to get the exact tone, and once you have that, you can latch onto the body and brain. My first successful mimic was a scientist named Dr. Carlyle. His voice didn't make sense to me, but I was able to replicate it and use it to my advantage. When we escaped the lab, my father broke into the Miller house. I was too young to really understand, but my mom urged me to mimic their youngest daughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was a lot more comfortable to mimic. I spent 8 years being Elizabeth Miller before we were forced to relocate. The family we were impersonating were growing suspicious of us, and my brother was getting progressively sicker. He couldn't acclimate to a body. The Miller's son almost killed him, and he only embodied the kid's voice. The Setori household is where we struck gold. Fitz Setori, sitting in front of me blindfolded, was my brother's saving grace. When I was 12 years old, my parents kidnapped the Setori family and forced them into their own basement, immediately stealing their faces. I remember Ruby Setori sitting cross-legged on the floor, her wide eyes filled with tears. Dad said I had to talk to her to form the connection. When she refused to talk back, my father was forceful. Our first conversation was me mimicking her sobs, her throaty cries for me to get away from her. With Ruby's voice, I asked for questions. Mom told me I had to talk to her before the bond was severed. "What's your favorite color?" I asked, swirling her voice around my mouth. "What did you do to my family?" Ruby squeaked. I looked at my dad for help and he shook his head. "Ask her again." I took a deep breath. "What is your favorite color?" "Pink," she whispered. "Pink," I repeated, leaning closer. "Please," Ruby said. "Please don't hurt me." "Please," I said, clinging on to her tone, the exact indentation in her speech. She cocked her head and I did too. "Please don't hurt me." "I'm not going to," I told her, when the invisible ribbon binding us together tightened, entangling. This time I was speaking over her. My face became Ruby Setori, thick brown hair and wide eyes, lips parted in a silent cry. "I promise I'm not going to hurt you." Ruby stared at me like I was a monster. She shrieked, stumbling back, only to be forced into place by my mother. Dad told me mimicking had 3 stages. Voice, body, mind. I already had Ruby's voice, and I was wearing her face. Her memories hit me like a tidal wave, warm and cozy. I saw her perfect family, all of her friends, growing up behind a white picket fence and a fluffy dog named Cosmo. Ruby liked orange soda and ice cream. She was smart at math but got her words mixed up. She loved elephant plushies and the Disney Channel. The human girl was scared of the dark, scared of what lurked in the dark, scared of me. I wanted to tell her I wasn't a monster. "Ruby," I whispered, "I'm sorry." She didn't move, and something slimy erupted up my throat. Ruby's expression was frozen in terror, her mouth slightly open, eyes wide. "Ruby." The girl's voice was a strangled cry. "I'm sorry." I lurched back, swallowing a cry. Ruby's Setori was mimicking me, which was the final stage. I went through it as a little kid, but I was too young to remember assimilating with Elizabeth Miller. My brother's assimilation was different, and a lot more brutal. Fitz Setori did not want to have his face and voice stolen. He escaped 4 times, attacking my mother, her wearing his own mother's face. My brother was gentle, kneeling in front of him and speaking in soft tones. My sister and I watched from the corner of the room, too scared to go near the unpredictable human boy. "Hello." My brother was too sick to stand. "Can you tell me your name?" Fitz spat at him. "Screw you," the 14-year-old hissed. "You're not taking my voice." "Screw you," my brother mimicked, already taking hold of the boy's tone. Fitz shuffled back. "Get away from me." "Get away from me," my brother copied. His nose wasn't bleeding this time, and very slowly, he adapted Fitz's face. It took a while, and a lot of screaming and crying. I didn't want to watch, but I was also curious about how human children were supposed to act. I was never in a stable body enough to fully adapt to emotions. Fitz was feeling panic and fear and anger, all of which I decided to copy. But my brother did manage to mimic Fitz Setori. Mr. and Mrs. Setori begged my parents to let their children go, but my dad needed the Setori kids for our survival. Cassie and I sang another song, this time to block out the screaming. My family took over the Setori household and slid into our roles as the not quite perfect family on the quiet suburban streets. Growing up, Dad insisted on daily tests to make sure our bonds with the Setori siblings were still intact. We were forbidden from talking to them. Presently, I couldn't stop myself. There was something wrong with my family, and I had zero doubts the family had something to do with it. Dad had drawn a line on the basement floor. We were required to stay behind the line, unless we wanted to be grounded until college. Stepping over it, I shivered, my bare feet grazing warm blood pooling across the floor. Mom and Dad were always protective over the basement. They told us the Setori family were safe and unharmed, but that was hard to believe. Even my parents resented humans for creating them and torturing them. What my parents did to the human was a whole other level of torture, especially the adults. Mr. and Mrs. Setori had been in a medically induced coma for almost 4 years. Their heads were bowed, plastic tubes sticking directly into their skull. Cassie Setori was awake. I could hear her breathing. She was pretending to be out of it. Fitz Setori had been fixed by my father a year ago. Dad said his behavior was too dangerous. 1 minute the boy was screaming and threatening, and the next he was silent. Drool seeping down his chin, head tipped back, blinking at the ceiling. The fixing was in case Fitz ever managed to gain control of my brother. When I crouched in front of the Setori siblings, I felt a deep, twisting guilt eating me up inside. They were barely humans anymore, stripped of their terrestrial bodies, atoms and static and a shadow of what once was. The blood made me nauseous, splattering their arms and legs and clothes they were growing out of. Ruby's hair was almost at a Rapunzel length. I wanted to see the good in that, maybe call her a princess, though maybe she was more of a sleeping beauty, forced into slumber. Fitz had aged way beyond his age, bearded like his father. Cassie's pigtails were touching the floor. I pretended not to see the restraints cruelly binding their wrists, the burn marks branding them as ours. The three were skeletal, pale and malnourished. Humans who were anything but. My stomach twisted when I peeked under Cassie's blindfold. Her right eye was gone, scooped out of its socket. Dad didn't have to hurt them. He didn't have to tie them up. But I know what humans are like. They are scary and unpredictable, and will murder their own kind. I did try to talk to them before Dad fixed the Setori son, Fitz, Cassie, and me. The Setori siblings told us we were dead, that they were going to kill us slowly and painfully, by slicing their own throats. Fitz tried to argue that it wasn't us who did this, only for his original to call him a piece of crap. Ever since then, Mom put a lock on the basement door. I was trying to loosen Ruby's ropes, ignoring my father's earlier warning, when a familiar light filled the room, a camera flash. When I stumbled to my feet, I was alone. A giggle caught me off guard. It was Ruby Setori herself. Her lips split into a grin. "Can we play a game?" she asked. Her voice was made of static, barely a whisper. The girl wasn't supposed to have her voice. My voice. I held my breath. I had to be tactical with my speech. "What did you do to my family?" "I have a better question," she said, growing stronger. She lifted her head. I could hear her straining against the ropes. "What's your favorite color?" "Pink," I said. "What did you do to my family?" In the corner of my eye, I detected movement. There was something at the other end of the room, twitching. "What about your favorite TV show?" Ruby asked, leaning forward. "You must have one. Maybe it's even mine." It was hers, and she knew that. "Buffy the Vampire Slayer," I said, my mouth filling with blood. Just like Dad said, our bond was severing. If I continued to talk to her, I risked detaching from her completely. Ruby Setori wanted her voice back. "I love Buffy." The girl's smile was, dare I think, genuine. "How about we talk to your brother? Is he doing okay, Ruby? Is he acting?" She paused, sucking her teeth. "Kinda weird." Upstairs, I could hear Fitz's laughter getting louder and louder. "Please." Ruby was mimicking her younger self. Even blindfolded, I could see the gleam in her eyes. "What did you do to my family?" Her words forced me into action. I prodded Fitz Setori, only for his head to hang, unconscious. There was dried blood under his nose, a slimy ooze of black. Prying open his mouth, I checked his teeth. Too many. Just like Cassie, a whole new row of spiky incisors were pushing through. Dad was hurting them. He was torturing them, turning them into something. My quivering hands found a needle sticking into the back of his head, colorful wires protruding into his skin. There was a clear fluid being pumped into the three of them. If Dad was experimenting on the Setori family, was it affecting us too? "Well?" Ruby demanded, her voice twisting, contorting into that of a monster. "What did you do to my family?" Instead of answering her, I forced my legs to move toward the movement on the other side of the room. There was something piled on the floor, jerking in sharp movements, a slimy mess of inside-out flesh. It hit me when I was closer. The bodies entangled with each other, some of them headless. Others missing arms and distinct facial features were me. Dozens of ruby Satoris, both made of buzzing static and terrestrial flesh, covered in a slimy, blood-tinged substance. Like these things were being born, not made. I think I was sick, all over myself. Another blinding flash hit the corner of my eye, and in front of me, another thing was slowly forming. First static, growing into skin, a body molded and sculpted into existence. This ruby had no eyes, no arms, her limbs contorted like doll pieces. I was aware I was staggering back, slipping in what looked and felt like part of a placenta. The Setori siblings were making copies of me. My gaze found one singular version of me who was almost perfect, except her enlarged brain expanding through the skull. And these replicas were getting better by the minute. "Ruby," Mom shouted from upstairs. "Did you get my wine?" I left the basement, my heart in my throat. Upstairs, my brother and sister were giggling, and downstairs in the basement, the Setori siblings were laughing harder. 3 nights since I spoke to Ruby, and the copies of me are getting better. One of them managed to walk upstairs yesterday. I think the siblings are slowly making another version of their sister. I want to talk to her. I want to know what she's doing to my family, but I can't talk to her. If I do, I lose Ruby Setori. Mom and Dad play peekaboo with me every night. They're behind every door, their hands covering their faces. Cassie is eating meat raw from the refrigerator. Fitz is getting better at crawling under my door, and the laughter in the basement is getting louder. Please help me. I'm so scared of my family. I don't think the Satoris were my parents' best choice, after all.